The views and opinions expressed in this content are that of a continuously evolving nature and are subject to change as humanity evolves into higher states of awareness.
What was your life like when you were a child?
Right, well, I was born out of wedlock, and in those days this was a terrible thing. Today it's the norm. And my mother was an actress and my father was an actor, and they were in rep, and they worked with a lot of the top stars today. I remember she talked a lot about Thora Hird, Diana Dawes, people like that. And so when I was born, you know, in a theatre, she couldn't keep us, so we were put into a convent. You know, my sister and I. We were put into a convent, which was a Nazareth House convent. And it was a very close convent. You didn't see people come in and out, not in those days. And the nuns that were in the convent had been children in the convent before, before they became nuns, and their nuns had been children before in the convent, way back to the 12th century. So it was very primitive, very cold. It was in the war and the war years, so there wasn't much food, and I was very mind controlled into fear of God and religion, and we were all sinners. So I was brought up like that, and a very mind controlled from a very early age. I was quite lucky. I came out when I was 9. And my mother married, she got married, and she had another 5 children. So I was the eldest of all the children. And because we never had any toys in the convent, my mother was pregnant when I came out, and she provided me with this little baby boy called David, who I absolutely adored. I loved him to bits. And he gave me lots of love. And even today, he will say, "You were always cuddling me, Anne." And I said, "I know, because I loved you so much." And then she gave me Mary, who's quite famous, my sister Mary, in her own right, because she works with the UFO part of all of this. And her name is Mary Rodwell. And you know, I was very obedient. And one of the things I remember, when I came out the convent, I was sent upstairs to my mother's bedroom to get something off her dressing table. And I stood at the doorway and I saw this picture of a girl moving. And I thought, I didn't know pictures moved. And I'm looking at this young girl, and it dawned on me that it wasn't a picture, it was actually me, because I'd never seen a mirror before, because you would have been vain looking in a mirror. This would have been a big sin. So I'm looking at myself and I said, my God, I've got brown eyes. I didn't know I had brown eyes. And I was fascinated with this, seeing myself and looking at myself, what I looked like. I was 9 years old. And you know, and then I went on my knees and I prayed, because I thought I'm being vain. And I was praying to God and I was saying, it's such a wicked thing that I'm doing. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. And my mother came up and I was sobbing by this time. I was praying to God to forgive me for being so vain. And of course she laughed. And she said, you're not being vain, you know, it's quite normal. You're going to see lots of mirrors and you're going to see your reflection in lots of things. And they were wrong. And I said, but how can they be wrong? So that was my first real thing of thinking, the nuns are wrong with certain things, because they're supposed to be from God, you know. And of course, when they did go into the convents eventually, they took all the children away, very much so. But they weren't evil. They were just nuns. They were only doing what the nuns had done to them. So they thought they were doing the right thing. But I'm very grateful for that experience, because it taught me mind control, and it taught me how easily we can be manipulated as children to do things. For instance, I do have to say that if they'd have told me to lick the floor, I would have done it. If they'd have told me to put a bomb on myself and go and kill a Protestant, I would have done it. That's why these young men and women that are doing this in another religion, they're not evil, they're mind controlled from a very early age. And this is where religion, to my mind, is not very good, parts of it. So parts of it is good, but there is a lot side to it that I think aren't very good myself. But then you must understand, one of the things I would like to say is take on board which gels with you, because this is my knowing, my truth. It may not be yours, and that's fine. We all have to find our own way of finding our own truth for ourselves, and this is something that I've discovered. So when I reached the age where my last beautiful daughter went to university, it was my last chick was leaving home, and I was devastated. I thought, what am I going to do with my life? You know, all my children have left now, and I'm on my own with my husband. And he was out most of the time because he's with his job. And then my neighbour died next door, and I went to the funeral. And I talked to this lady who's a neighbour, and we were talking about our aches and pains, because I'd been suffering with sciatica for many years. And I said, out of the blue, I don't know where it came from at the time, I said, I'm that desperate to get rid of this pain, I'd go to one of these funny people, a psychic healer. And the minute I said it, I thought, I can't do that. That's evil. They're evil, these people. Only Jesus can heal. But she turned round and she said, oh, there's one just moved across the road. She's just moved a few weeks ago. And she said to me, I'm a psychic healer. And she said, if you know anybody who's in pain, they can knock on my door and I'll give them some healing for nothing. She said, there you go. You can go over there and, you know, and have some healing. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go, because I said I would do it. And if I see her, I don't go, she's going to say, how did you get on? And I say, well, I didn't go. I'd look foolish, because I didn't know this woman very well. And so I thought, well, I've got to go. Now, the only reason I found out about the psychic healer was because there used to be a programme on television called Kilroy, and they'd had healers on this programme. And so that's where it actually came from. And so I thought the next day, I was in real agony that night. So I had a shower and I got myself all ready to go across the road. And I started going at 11 o'clock. And I was so frightened to go to this woman that I couldn't step over the threshold. And so I kept making excuses why I shouldn't go. And I said, well, I'll just make a cup of tea and then I'll go. Or I'll just do that little job and then I'll go. So I eventually went at 6 o'clock. Now, the way spirit works is they don't, you know, they made me go through that fear. I had to go through the fear barrier to go to her. But also, she wouldn't have been in at that time. By the time I went, because she went out to work, she'd had her meal, she'd washed up, and when I went at 6 o'clock, she was free. They're very crafty, you guys, you know. You are being lifted up and put into different places, and you don't realise it. I realise it now, but then I didn't. And I went across, and I knocked on her door, and she came to the door, and I said, my name's Anne. I said, and I hear you're a spiritual healer. And she looked at me, and she said, are you in pain, love? And I said, yes. But I thought, I'm not going to show you where it is, because I didn't believe her one bit. I thought she would be working with the devil, to be quite honest. And so she took me into this little tiny room, and in the room was just a coffee table, a little light, a candle, and she had an old-fashioned, now, a tape recorder, and she was playing this music. And the music was, it was meditating music. I'd never heard it before, and it was in a wood. And there was, you know, a waterfall and birds singing and wind rattling through the trees. And I thought it was wonderful. And I was in absolute agony. And she sat me in this chair. And she said, now, she said, I'm going to just do the healing on you. And she said, it won't hurt or anything. She said, I'm just going to bring the angels here and your helpers, my helpers. So I thought, okay. So I sat there, but I went into this music and I felt her hands on me, but she was standing a little bit away from me, and I thought, God, she's got long arms. But then I felt other hands on me, and this was amazing. Something happened in that room, and I could feel these hands, and I thought, is this my imagination? But she was, and straight away she said, it's at the bottom of your spine. She said, you are absolutely in agony. And she started pulling the pain away from the bottom of my spine. And I didn't know what she was doing, but I could feel it going. And I went into this music, and I sort of went in sort of a trance state, I suppose. But after 20 minutes, the pain was still there, but it wasn't so severe. And she said, I'm going to go and make a cup of tea now. And she said, and I'll come back, and you just go into the music again when it's ready, she said, because you've had enough healing now. And as she opened the door, the phone went. Well, in those days, you had to sit with the phone. It wasn't cordless. And they kept her away from that room, whoever it was, for 20 minutes. And in that time, I went back into the music, and the hands came back. And that's when it happened. I sort of had, it was like a doorway opening. All the fear of the convent and the Catholic Church disappeared. It was like they pulled all that fear that was at the bottom of my spine. It was all gathered there, you see, to me. This is what I feel. And I've been told this before, afterwards. But it was amazing what happened in that room. And then I came out of there, and it was 7 o'clock. And she made a cup of tea, and she sat with me. And we talked till 11 o'clock. And I was saying, well, what about this? What about that? And the things that she was telling me, I couldn't believe. I thought, why aren't we told all this? This is incredible. And, you know, I said, how can you do healing when Jesus was the only one who could do healing? And she said something very profound. She said, Jesus said, everything I can do, you can do, and more. You are no different than me. We are all one. And she says, that's what we got taught. We are just like him. We can do. He had lives like you. Well, I didn't know what she meant when she said that, but she said to me, all the things that we're talking about, I go to a thing called Kindred Spirit, and it's a gathering of people. We go every Monday night, and it costs you £2 to go in, and you get a cup of tea and biscuits with that. And you'll meet people there that will have all the answers, because every week we have a different speaker, and it'll speak on a different subject to do with this. And she said, it won't cost you anything. We go every week. So if you'd like, you can come with us. Well, yes, please. And I went, and my life changed completely. It was amazing what happened. I met these fantastic people. They were so interesting. And one of the things I noticed about them, when somebody left the room, they didn't pull them to pieces. They didn't care what car you had, or whether you were rich, poor, beautiful, ugly, whatever. They weren't catty, in other words. They weren't picking holes in people. And this is one of the first things I remember noticing, which I'd never experienced before. Somebody lent me a book. It was called The Teachings of Silver Birch. And it was a channel book, which I didn't know anything about channeling, but I realised that I was told this Silver Birch was a guide who came through a lady or a gentleman, I can't remember now because it was such a long time ago, and talked to her through her voice. And you could ask Silver Birch questions, and they can't lie. We lie, you know, but they don't. And one of the things that stuck me in this book, which I've never forgotten, is a man said, the fox, is it all right for me to kill the fox? because the fox are killing my chickens. So Silverbirch said, certainly you can kill the fox with your gun when he can get a gun and shoot you. If he can't do that, you cannot kill the fox. So he says, but the fox is killing my chickens. And he said, God made the fox to kill chickens. He didn't make any mistakes. And he said, but in the wild, they have trees, and they fly up into the trees to get away from the fox. But you put them in a little pen and say to the fox, there you go. And the fox gets in, he's going to kill your chickens. He said, you're doing the wrong things with chickens. Let them fly away, up high. And I thought, gosh, that is so good, you know. I pondered on that, you know, that's what he said. Because it's not right that we are killing animals when they can't defend themselves, you know. And so what I liked about all of this is every time I read something or did something, I pondered on it and thought about it. And it was real education for me. I felt before that I wasn't alive until I came into this. I only lived half a life. I lived with the material. I didn't live with my spiritual side. And religion isn't your spiritual side. It's prayers and it's dogma. And it's putting you in a little box and saying, don't question. But with all of this, it's question everything. You're not in a little box. You're free to think the way you want to think.
With the Silverbirch teachings?
Pardon?
With Silverbirch teachings?
No, this is... I'm talking about what I discovered. I discovered that with this, it wasn't like religion with the spiritual part of yourself. You know, with learning to be mediums and all this sort of thing. We're not taught any of that, you know. In fact, they tell you it's evil to go there. And I believed it, of course, very much so. Even though I walked away from it when I was 17, I was very religious up till then, because I was frightened of God. I really was scared of him. I was a God-fearing woman, you know. And
so would you say religion teaches you that?
What religion does, it teaches you to follow a certain path, and you don't question anything. Why has you got people like the Inquisition, you know, were killing anybody who wasn't Catholics, weren't Christians, and they're saying do not kill, and yet they were torturing and killing people. It was so hypocritical. When you think about it, you start seeing all the hypocritical things. I remember seeing, you know, in the war, an old film, and it had the Vatican, and the priests were actually blessing the tanks that were going off to war. And I thought, but they're telling people not to kill, and there they are blessing and saying, do it in God's name. It was so hypocritical. But a lot of people don't question anything. They just accept. As you know, they say, well, it was in the papers, so it must be true. You know, how many times you hear that? You know, or it's been on the television, it must be true. So, you know, this is what I discovered. I'm 80 years old, and I have a lot of life to look back on, and people I've met and situations that's happened to me. And when I found out that we had reincarnation was a big shock. I was in 50s at the time. And up to then, I didn't realise that we'd had other lives. And it just put everything into perspective, that did. Because when you look back on your life and you see the ups and downs of life, life doesn't run smoothly, but you don't want it to run smoothly because that's how you learn from the knocks. You know, you learn to love the people that hurt you. If you can do that, you've cracked it. Not to be resentful and to be hateful to people. Because if you've got everything laid on a plate for you, you know, you're born... When I was a child, and I went to the films eventually, I used to think, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to be a child with a film star, with a swimming pool and all that money and, you know, and the pretty clothes and everything. But really, a lot of these kids, they haven't suffered, so they haven't learnt anything. The suffering actually teaches you things, funnily enough, I think. It's been my experience, anyway.